December 11th, 1943. A steep hillside near Monte Cassino, Italy. Private First Class Benjamin Sosi pushed his body flat against the cold, muddy ground as German artillery whistled overhead. The morning fog hung over the valley below, blocking his view of the target, but not the sounds of Panzer tanks moving toward the open American position. Through his scope, he could see nothing but gray mist. Yet his unit's survival depended on his ability to find and eliminate the enemy artillery observer directing the deadly attack. Eagle 6 to Hawkeye. Give me coordinates or pull back immediately, crackled his radio. Captain Miller's voice carried the stress of a man watching his company get torn apart. Sosi's hand shook slightly as he reached inside his jacket pocket and pulled out a small metal cylinder. The unusual modification he'd secretly installed inside his standard-issue Springfield rifle scope was a direct violation of equipment rules, punishable by court-martial under combat conditions. But as another shell landed just 30 yards from his position, showering him with dirt and rock pieces, he knew normal tactics had failed. Negative on pullback, he whispered into his radio, his Navajo accent barely noticeable after years of government boarding school designed to erase it. I can fix this. With practiced movements, he took apart his scope while keeping his body pressed against the ground. His fingers, despite the December cold, worked with precision as he inserted the contraption into the tube. A handmade optical filter system using materials gathered from a bombed-out camera shop in Naples. Materials that, according to U.S. Army equipment rules, had no business being inside military equipment. What the hell are you doing? Hissed his spotter, Corporal Davis, watching in disbelief as Sosi modified military equipment in the middle of active combat. That's a direct violation. Trust me, Sosi replied, putting the scope back together with the new filter in place. He raised the rifle again, looking through the modified optics. The fog that had made normal scopes useless suddenly revealed ghostly outlines, heat signatures of men and machines appearing through the mist. He could see what no other American on that hillside could. The German forward observer team huddled behind a stone wall 600 yards away, directing the artillery fire that was destroying American positions. I have the target, he said quietly into the radio as he exhaled and squeezed the trigger. No one in the 5th Army Specialized Scout Sniper Detachment knew that one man's rule-breaking that morning would not only save hundreds of lives, but would eventually rewrite the basic principles of battlefield optics for generations to come. Benjamin Sosi was born on April 27, 1921, in a small Hogan near Chino, Arizona, on the sprawling Navajo reservation. The son of a silversmith father and a mother who wove complicated rugs that occasionally sold to trading posts, Sosi grew up in a world where observation was survival. From the age of 5, his grandfather, a former scout for the U.S. Cavalry during the late 19th century, taught him to track animals across the harsh desert landscape, to notice small changes in soil makeup, to read weather patterns in distant cloud formations, and to understand how light behaved at different times of day. The white man's eyes only see what is easy to see, his grandfather would tell him in Navajo, a language so complicated that it contained specific words for optical events that English barely acknowledged. You must learn to see what hides between the seen and unseen. At age 8, Sosi was forcibly enrolled in a government boarding school in Flagstaff, where speaking his native language was punishable by beatings, and where his given name, Hastinatsa, was replaced with Benjamin. The school's mission was clear: strip away indigenous identity and replace it with American values and knowledge. While traumatic in many ways, the experience gave Sosi access to something that would prove important: Western scientific education. His science teacher, Dr. Harold Williams, recognized something special in the quiet Navajo boy who seemed to understand the behavior of light in ways that surprised him. When demonstrating basic principles of optics with a simple lens, it was Sosi who could predict how images would bend before the demonstration was complete. You have a gift, Benjamin, Williams told him after class one day. The way you understand light, it's intuitive. During those years, Sosi managed to create a combination of knowledge, traditional Navajo understandings of the natural world combined with Western physics. He read everything he could find about optics, light, and vision. By the time he graduated in 1939, he had developed theories about how to see through air conditions that normal wisdom thought impossible to see through. He returned briefly to the reservation, working alongside his aging father in silversmithing, putting his understanding of light and reflection into metal designs that local traders found unusually captivating. But the wider world was falling into war, and after Pearl Harbor, like thousands of other Native Americans, Sosi enlisted despite coming from a people who weren't even granted U.S. citizenship until 1924. During basic training at Fort Benning, Georgia, in early 1942, Sosi's marksmanship instructors were amazed by his natural ability. On the rifle range, He consistently outshot men who had grown up hunting in the Appalachian Mountains or the forests of Maine. But it wasn't just his accuracy that stood out. It was his ability to hit targets under conditions that others found impossible, through heat waves, in driving rain, or during the confusing light of dusk. "It's like he can see what isn't there," remarked one instructor to another. When asked to explain his technique, Sosi struggled to express concepts that bridged two worldviews. "The air speaks to the light," he once said, trying to explain how he could see through heat distortion. The other recruits laughed. The instructors marked him as naturally gifted, but somewhat odd. His unusual abilities and his background eventually caught the attention of Army intelligence officers who were recruiting for the now famous Code Talkers program. But Sosi's path changed when a colonel from the recently formed Scout Sniper Training Program witnessed his exceptional shooting during an exercise. "I don't care if he's Navajo, Negro, or Martian," the colonel reportedly said. "I want him in the sniper program." Despite the specialized training's typical preference for white soldiers with rural backgrounds, Sosi was accepted into the elite program at Camp Pendleton. There, among men who viewed him with suspicion and sometimes clear hostility, he kept to himself, spoke little, and let his shooting do the talking. During training exercises, he began quietly modifying his equipment, making small adjustments to his scope that instructors either didn't notice or chose to ignore given his results. Small pieces of colored glass positioned exactly within his sight picture allowed him to see targets that others couldn't see through California coastal fog. It was the beginning of an innovation he had no idea would soon be all that stood between life and death for hundreds of American soldiers on an Italian mountainside. By mid-1943, the Allied campaign in Italy had become a grinding, brutal fight. The German forces, under Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, had transformed the mountainous Italian peninsula into a defensive fortress. The Gustav Line, anchored by the ancient abbey at Monte Cassino, presented the Allies with one of the most difficult defensive positions of the European theater. The Fifth Army, commanded by Lieutenant General Mark Clark, had been tasked with breaking through this line, a mission that had already cost thousands of American lives as they fought their way north from the beaches of Salerno. The terrain itself was an enemy. Steep mountains with narrow valleys funneled attacking forces into killing zones where German artillery pre-registered on likely routes of approach could deliver devastatingly accurate fire. December of 1943 brought additional challenges. Unusually heavy rainfall had turned mountain streams into raging rivers and transformed dirt roads into nearly impossible mud tracks. Worse, the winter weather patterns created ongoing fog conditions in the valleys around Monte Cassino, giving German observers on the high ground a critical advantage. They could direct artillery fire onto American positions while remaining hidden by the same fog that exposed their enemies. The 88th Infantry Division, of which Private First Class Sosi Scout Sniper Section was a part, had been tasked with seizing several key hill positions that would allow the larger American force to outflank the monastery defenses. Intelligence reports showed the German 10th Army had positioned elite mountain troops and elements of the 1st Parachute Division in these sectors, some of the most experienced soldiers in the Wehrmacht. "Gentlemen, our situation is dangerous," Colonel Raymond Kendall told his staff officers during a briefing on December 10th. "The Germans have observation of every move we make while we're fighting blind. Their artillery observers are killing our advance units, and we cannot locate them through this damn fog." The divisional artillery commander, Brigadier General Wallace, added his assessment. "We're using 10 times the ammunition for minimal effect. Without eyes on target, we might as well be throwing rocks." The human cost of this disadvantage was staggering. In the 3 days before December 11th, the 88th Division had suffered 478 casualties, most from artillery strikes so precisely targeted that they could only have been directed by observers with clear sight lines to American positions. The specialized scout sniper sections, including Sosi's two-man team, had been tasked with locating and eliminating these observers, but normal optics proved useless in the current conditions. Standard issue M73B1 telescopic sights, while excellent in clear weather, couldn't see through the combination of fog and smoke that covered the battlefield. Captain James Miller, commanding the Scout Sniper Detachment, had deployed 8 teams across a 5-mile front, hoping that at least one would find a German observation post. By the morning of December 11th, 7 teams had reported failure or had been forced to pull back under fire. Sosi and his spotter, Corporal William Davis, remained the last team in position, a dangerous outpost on a forward slope that offered the potential for a commanding view, if only they could see through the impossible mist. What made their position particularly important was its closeness to the planned route for the 42nd Infantry Regiment, scheduled to advance through a narrow valley at 0800 hours. If the German observers remained operational, directing artillery onto that tight space Military planners estimated casualties could exceed 60%, effectively destroying the regiment as a fighting force before they even made contact with enemy infantry. Meanwhile, at the divisional headquarters established in the shell-damaged town of Navajo, staff officers studied maps and weather forecasts, seeking alternatives that didn't exist. The offensive couldn't be postponed again. Strategic needs demanded forward progress. Higher command was growing impatient with delays. If we can't find those observers by dawn, Colonel Kendall told his operations officer, we'll have to advance blind and accept the losses. The weight of those potential casualties, hundreds of American sons, husbands, and fathers, hung in the air as heavily as the fog that protected their enemies. No one in that command post could have imagined that their salvation would come from a Navajo soldier's unauthorized modification to standard Army equipment, a modification that would challenge basic assumptions about battlefield optics and eventually transform sniper operations across the entire U.S. military. The hours before dawn on December 11th stretched like cold molasses. Sosi and Davis had kept their observation position for 22 hours straight, their bodies stiff from not moving and the penetrating winter chill. They had taken turns sleeping in 30-minute periods, though sleep was a generous term for the state of half-consciousness they achieved while keeping their bodies perfectly still to avoid being spotted. Their hillside spot provided what should have been an excellent view of a 300-yard stretch of road that intelligence believed German forward observers were using to move between positions. The problem was simple yet impossible to overcome. No one could see more than 50 yards through the thick fog that covered the valley. "We are wasting our time," Davis whispered as false dawn began to lighten the eastern sky. A former Pennsylvania coal miner with 3 years of education and a natural talent for math, Davis had been paired with Sosi because of his ability to calculate complicated firing solutions in his head. "Can't shoot what you can't see, and we can't see." Sosi remained silent, studying the fog with an intensity that made Davis uncomfortable. There was something almost mystical in the way the Navajo soldier related to the environment, a quality that many of the white soldiers found unsettling. "The Germans are down there," Sosi finally said. "I can feel them watching." Davis held back a sigh. He respected Sosi's marksmanship, but had little patience for what he thought was superstition. "Feeling doesn't help us. We need eyes on target, and unless you've got some Navajo magic to see through fog, we should report negative contact." The radio crackled to life at that moment. Captain Miller's voice was tense. "Eagle 6 to all scout elements. Regiment moves in 90 minutes. I need targets or confirmation of sector clear. Report status." One by one, the other teams radioed in their failures. No targets identified. No movement detected. Recommendation to delay advance. When it came time for Sosi and Davis to respond, Davis reached for the handset, but Sosi placed a stopping hand on his arm. "I have an idea," he said quietly. "What idea?" "We've tried everything in the manual." "Not everything," Sosi replied. He reached into his field jacket and pulled out a small canvas pouch that Davis had never seen before. "I need 15 minutes. Davis looked doubtful. "Captain's waiting for our report." "Tell him we have a possible solution. 15 minutes. Reluctantly, Davis keyed the radio. "Hawkeye to Eagle 6. Request 15-minute delay for final report. Possible solution developing." The radio was silent for a moment before Miller responded, his frustration clear even through the static. "You have 10 minutes, Hawkeye. After that, I need a definite report." 6 out. Davis turned to Sosi. "This better be good." Without responding, Sosi began taking apart his rifle scope with practiced efficiency. From the canvas pouch, he removed several small objects wrapped in soft cloth. When he unwrapped them, Davis saw what appeared to be thin discs of glass or crystal in various colors and thicknesses. "What the hell is that?" Davis demanded, his voice a harsh whisper. "Something I've been working on," Sosi replied as he carefully removed the eyepiece lens assembly from the scope. "In the desert, my people could see heat rising from rocks miles away. We could track animals by the warmth they left on stone. The white man's science calls it infrared radiation." Davis watched in growing alarm as Sosi inserted one of the discs into the scope tube, followed by what looked like a thin piece of copper with a pinhole in its center. "You're modifying military equipment in a combat zone. That's a court-martial offense. Only if it doesn't work," Sosi said with a calmness that Davis found maddening. He continued his modifications, adding another disc of amber-colored material before carefully putting the scope back together. "Where did you even get those materials?" "Naples, a camera shop that had been bombed. The owner was a scientist before the war. He understood what I was trying to do." Sosi mounted the scope back onto his Springfield rifle. "The Germans use heat to see at night sometimes. I'm using it to see through fog." "That's impossible," Davis said flatly. The Army's best engineers haven't figured that out. You expect me to believe you put together a heat scope from junk? Not infrared exactly, Sosi replied, making final adjustments. Something simpler. The fog blocks visible light, but not all heat signatures. These crystals and filters shift what we can see. He raised the rifle and looked through the scope. Now we wait for the sun. As the hidden sun rose higher, casting spread out light through the fog, Sosi remained motionless, his eye pressed to the modified scope. Davis checked his watch nervously. Their 10 minutes had expired, and the radio would soon demand their report. I see movement, Sosi suddenly whispered. 400 yards. Small stone structure near the road junction. Davis raised his binoculars, but saw nothing but gray mist. There's nothing there, Ben. 3 men. 1 with a radio, 2 with observation equipment. Sosi's voice had taken on a different quality. Precise, clinical, certain. They're directing fire from our earlier position. They haven't spotted us yet. Davis felt a chill that had nothing to do with the December cold. Either his partner was seeing things or he was witnessing something that couldn't be explained. You're sure? Instead of answering, Sosi keyed the radio. Hawkeye to Eagle 6. Have confirmed enemy observation post 400 yards southeast of our position. Stone structure at road junction. Request permission to engage. The radio crackled immediately. Eagle 6 to Hawkeye. That position was checked yesterday. Nothing there. What's your visibility? I can see them, sir, Sosi replied simply. A long pause followed. Davis could almost feel Captain Miller's frustration coming through the static. Finally, Eagle 6 to Hawkeye. You have permission to engage, but this better not be a wild goose chase. Regiment moved in 60 minutes regardless. Understood. Hawkeye out. Sosi settled into his firing position, making tiny adjustments to his stance. Davis, still seeing nothing but fog through his binoculars, prepared to calculate the shot anyway. Wind estimate? 3 miles per hour left to right, Sosi answered. Temperature 37 degrees. Humidity 100%. Davis ran the calculations. 400 yards. Just 2 minutes right for wind. 1 minute high for humidity density. Sosi made the adjustments without comment, his breathing slowing as he prepared to fire. Davis watched in a mixture of doubt and fascination as his partner went through his pre-shot routine. On target, Sosi whispered. Observer with radio. The rifle cracked, its sound echoing across the valley. Through his binoculars, Davis still saw nothing but fog. Call it, he said, doubt clear in his voice. Hit, Sosi said calmly, working the bolt to load another round. Shifted 2 feet right. Second observer moving to radio. Another shot. Another invisible result. Hit. Sosi loaded a third round. Last man running toward the road. The final shot rang out, and Sosi lowered his rifle. 3 targets eliminated. Davis stared at his partner, conflicting emotions fighting on his face. You expect me to confirm kills I can't even see? Before Sosi could answer, their radio came to life. Eagle 6 to Hawkeye. Fire mission just went silent mid-transmission. What's your status? Sosi keyed the radio. Hawkeye to Eagle 6. 3 enemy observers eliminated. Position secure. Can you confirm visually? Miller's voice carried equal parts hope and doubt. Affirmative, Sosi replied. Recommend sending patrol to Road Junction when regiment advances. They'll find the bodies. Another long pause followed. When Miller spoke again, his tone had changed slightly. Roger that, Hawkeye. Hold position and maintain overwatch for regiment advance. 6 out. Davis looked at Sosi, his expression unreadable. If you're wrong about this, we're both finished. I'm not wrong, Sosi said, already scanning for new targets through his modified scope. The artillery will stop now. You'll see. And indeed, for the first time in 3 days, the constant German artillery fire slowed down, then stopped completely. In the sudden unnatural silence, Davis felt the first shake of belief. How? He asked simply. Sosi handed him the rifle. Look for yourself. When Davis pressed his eye to the scope, he gasped. The foggy landscape had transformed. Ghostly outlines of trees, buildings, and land features appeared from the gray void. And there, at the road junction, he could make out 3 distinct heat signatures, already cooling bodies lying around what appeared to be radio equipment. My God, Davis whispered. How is this possible? The scope doesn't see light anymore, Sosi explained quietly. It sees heat differences. The crystals from the camera store shift the spectrum just enough. The copper plate focuses it. It's crude, but it works. Davis handed the rifle back, his hand shaking slightly. This changes everything. Only if they listen, Sosi replied. As the sun continued to rise, the fog remained thick over the valley, But through Sosey's modified scope, the battlefield had become clear. Over the next 45 minutes, he found and eliminated two more German observation teams that had moved forward to replace the first. By the time the 42nd Infantry Regiment began their advance at 0800 hours, the German artillery remained strangely silent, their observers blind and their coordination broken. What should have been a disastrous movement through a killing zone became instead a successful advance with minimal casualties. The regiment secured their objectives by mid-afternoon, flanking positions that had held up the Allied advance for weeks. And as reports came back to division headquarters, the impossible precision of a single sniper team operating in zero visibility conditions became the focus of intense interest. Neither Sosey nor Davis knew that their actions that morning would soon bring them under review from the highest levels of the U.S. Army Ordnance Department, review that would reveal a technological leap that no one had thought possible with the materials available in a combat zone in 1943. By mid-afternoon on December 11th, the fog had finally begun to lift, revealing the battlefield Sosey had already seen through his modified scope. The 42nd Regiment's advance had been remarkably successful, suffering only 23 casualties instead of the hundreds that had been grimly expected. As the regiment secured their objectives along the strategic ridge line overlooking the monastery, Captain Miller made his way to Sosey and Davis's position. Miller, a career officer with 8 years of service and a reputation for by-the-book operations, arrived visibly torn between gratitude and suspicion. The success of the morning's operation couldn't be denied, but the way it had been achieved couldn't be explained. "I want to understand exactly what happened here," he said without introduction, crouching beside the two men in their observation post. "Division says you eliminated 5 separate artillery observer teams in conditions with zero visibility." Davis glanced at Sosey, who remained quietly focused, his rifle cradled in his arms. "That's correct, sir," Davis confirmed. Private Sosey engaged and neutralized 5 targets at ranges between 400 and 600 yards. Miller's eyes narrowed. "That's not possible, Corporal. Not in this fog." "With respect, sir, the results speak for themselves," Davis replied. "The regiment advanced without artillery interference. The observation posts were found exactly where we reported them, with enemy KIA at each location." Miller turned his attention to Sosey. "Explain how you did it, Private." Sosey met his gaze steadily. "I modified my scope, sir." "Modified how?" Miller's voice sharpened. Wordlessly, Sosey handed over his rifle. Miller examined the outside of the scope, finding nothing obviously different from standard issue. "It looks normal." "The modifications are internal, sir." Miller's expression hardened. "You changed government equipment without permission in a combat zone?" "Yes, sir." The captain's face reddened with anger. "That's a direct violation of at least 3 regulations. Tampering with precision equipment could have endangered your entire unit." "With respect, Captain," Davis interrupted, "his modification saved the regiment. We're talking hundreds of lives." Miller raised a hand to silence him. "Results don't excuse violations, Corporal." He turned back to Sosey. "How exactly did you modify the scope?" Sosey explained the basic principles: the crystal filters, the copper plate, the rearranged lens setup. He spoke of heat signatures and light spectrum shifts in a way that showed both his traditional knowledge and his understanding of Western physics. As he spoke, Miller's expression slowly shifted from anger to reluctant fascination. "You're telling me you created a heat detection system using salvaged camera parts? A basic one?" "Yes, sir." Miller shook his head in disbelief. "Ordnance Department has been working on something similar for years without success. Their prototypes are the size of a footlocker and require electrical power. The principles are simpler than they realized," Sosey said quietly. Miller studied him for a long moment. "I should bring you up on charges, Private, but I've got 400 men who are alive because of what you did." He handed the rifle back. "Report to regiment headquarters at 1800 hours and bring your modified scope taken apart. The colonel wants to see it." After Miller left, Davis let out a long breath. "That could have gone worse." "It still might," Sosey replied, returning to his observation of the valley below. "The Army doesn't like when you break their rules, even when it works. They'd be idiots to punish you for this." Sosey's expression remained unchanged. "The white man's army has punished people for less." The meeting at regimental headquarters that evening was unlike anything Sosey had experienced in his military career. Instead of the expected disciplinary hearing, he found himself in a room with Colonel Kendall, the regimental commander, Major Whitaker from Division Intelligence, and a civilian who introduced himself only as Dr. Roberts from Washington. Sosey had taken apart his scope as ordered and laid the parts on a table in the taken-over Italian farmhouse that served as headquarters. The officers and the civilian gathered around, examining the crude but effective arrangement of salvaged parts. "Extraordinary," Dr. Roberts murmured, picking up one of the crystal filters with delicate fingers. The principle is sound, but the execution using these materials, it shouldn't work at all. Colonel Kendall, a gruff veteran of the First World War, was more direct. But it does work. We confirmed 5 enemy KIAs at the exact positions Private Sosi reported, all killed with single shots to vital areas in fog so thick our own men couldn't see 50 feet ahead. The heat differential imaging concept isn't new, Dr. Roberts explained, but achieving it with passive components, without electrical amplification or cooling systems, that's revolutionary. He turned to Sosi. Where did you learn about optical physics, Private? Books, sir. And from my grandfather. Roberts raised an eyebrow. Your grandfather taught you about heat imaging. He taught me how to see heat rising from rocks, how to track animals by the warmth they leave behind. The rest I figured out myself. Major Whitaker, who had been silently studying both SOSI and the scope components, finally spoke. Are you aware that you violated at least 7 regulations regarding the modification of military equipment? Private SOSI? Yes, sir. And are you aware that such violations are punishable by court-martial under combat conditions? Yes, sir. Whitaker leaned forward. Then perhaps you can explain why we shouldn't proceed with charges. Before Sosi could answer, Colonel Kendall interrupted. Because his violation saved my regiment, Major. 472 men advanced through a killing zone with minimal casualties. Because this soldier found a way to eliminate enemy observers when no one else could. Regulations exist for reasons, Colonel, Whitaker insisted. If every soldier decided to modify their equipment based on personal theories, then maybe we win this war sooner, Kendall counted. Dr. Roberts, still examining the scope components, looked up. This technology, crude as it is, represents a significant advancement. The Ordnance Department will be very interested in developing it further. A tense silence filled the room as the implications became clear. Military rules demanded punishment for SOSI's unauthorized modifications. Military necessity suggested a different course. Colonel Kendall finally broke the standoff. Here's what's going to happen. Major Whitaker, you will file a report saying that Private Sosi acted under direct orders to test experimental equipment provided by the Ordnance Department. That would be falsifying an official record, Whitaker protested. It would be protecting a valuable asset in technology. Kendall replied firmly. Dr. Roberts, I assume you can arrange appropriate paperwork from your department to support this story? The civilian nodded. Certainly. We've had several prototype optical systems in development. This can be classified retroactively as a field testament. And what about Private Sosi? Major Whitaker asked. All eyes turned to the Navajo soldier, who had remained silent throughout the exchange. Private Sosi will continue his duties as a scout sniper, Colonel Kendall declared, and he will work with Dr. Roberts to document the principles behind his modification for further development. And if I require his presence for additional consultation, Dr. Roberts inquired. We'll make him available as combat operations permit, Kendall agreed. But he remains under my command. The meeting ended with an uneasy agreement. Sosi's violation would be hidden behind a veil of classified research. His invention would be documented and developed through official channels. And most importantly, he would remain in the field where his skills had proven so valuable. As Sosi gathered the parts of his modified scope, Dr. Roberts approached him. You've created something remarkable, Private, he said quietly. Something that could change the course of this war and others to come. How does that make you feel? Sosi considered the question carefully. In my language, he finally replied, we don't have a word for invention. We have words for discovery. I didn't create this. I just found a way to see what was always there. Robert studied him with newfound respect. Well, what you discovered may save thousands of lives. I hope you understand the significance. I understand, sir, Sosi said, though his thoughts were already drifting back to his unit, to the next hill, the next battle, and the practical use of his discovery rather than its theoretical importance. As he left the headquarters, Colonel Kendall stopped him with a hand on his shoulder. What you did today was against regulations, son, the colonel said quietly. But it was also the kind of initiative that wins wars. Don't make me regret covering for you. No, sir, Sosi replied. Thank you, sir. One more thing, Kendall added. Your captain tells me you have enough materials to modify 3 more scopes. Is that true? Yes, sir. Good. Do it. Officially. You understand? Document everything. Work with your captain. But get it done before the next offensive. Yes, sir. As Sosi walked back to his unit's position in the gathering darkness, he thought about the strange path that had led him here. From the desert of the Navajo Nation to the mountains of Italy. From traditional knowledge thought worthless by his government to scientific principles that same government now eagerly wanted to understand. The irony wasn't lost on him. Back at the Scout Sniper Section's camp area, Davis was waiting with barely contained curiosity. "Well, court-martial or medal?" "Neither," Sosi replied, setting down his taken-apart scope. "They want me to make more." Davis grinned. "I told you they'd be idiots to punish you for this." His expression became serious. "So what happens now?" Sosi began putting his scope back together, now with official permission. "Now we do what we came here to do. We hunt." Over the next 3 weeks, Sosi worked with a small team that included Dr. Roberts and 2 Army technicians to improve and duplicate his modification. 4 more scopes were converted, allowing the Scout Sniper Section to operate effectively in conditions that had previously made them blind. The impact was immediate and dramatic. During the January offensive against the Gustav Line, German artillery effectiveness decreased by 63% as their observers were systematically eliminated despite weather conditions that should have protected them. The modified SOSI scopes, as they came to be informally known, remained a closely guarded secret. Official reports referred to them only as the Experimental Optical System T-43 and said the development was by the Army's Research Division. Sosi himself received no public recognition, though Colonel Kendall made sure a commendation appeared in his service record, carefully worded to avoid revealing the true nature of his contribution. The war continued. Sosi continued to serve with distinction, participating in actions throughout the Italian campaign and later in southern France. His modified scopes were gradually replaced by more refined versions developed by Army engineers, though none achieved quite the same effectiveness, using only passive components. The original prototype was quietly shipped back to Aberdeen Proving Grounds in Maryland, where it would later become the subject of intense study. By the time Germany surrendered in May 1945, Sosi had built an impressive record: 78 confirmed enemy kills, 4 Bronze Stars, and a Silver Star for actions near the French-German border in February 1945. What didn't appear in his official record was the estimated 400 Allied lives saved by his optical innovation and the targets it helped eliminate. After the war, Benjamin Sosi returned to the Navajo reservation. Unlike many returning Native American veterans who chose to remain in city areas, he felt drawn back to his homeland. Using his GI Bill benefits, he established a small optical shop in Gallup, New Mexico, making custom lens and specialty glasses. He married Eleanor Begay, a Navajo woman who had worked as a nurse during the war, and they raised 3 children in a modest home that blended traditional elements with modern conveniences. Sosi rarely spoke about his wartime experiences. When pressed by his children or neighbors, he would redirect with simple statements about "just doing my job" or change the subject completely. The innovative scope modification that had saved hundreds of lives became a classified military secret, and Sosi honored his promise of secrecy for decades. What few people knew was that the Army had not forgotten him. Periodically, unmarked government vehicles would arrive at his small shop, and men in civilian clothes would consult with him for hours. His children grew used to these mysterious visitors, though they never understood the true purpose behind them. "Dad's helping the government with special glasses," his oldest son would explain to curious friends, repeating the vague explanation his father had provided. In 1955, Corporal William Davis, Sosi's former spotter, made the journey to the reservation. Now a successful insurance salesman in Pittsburgh with a wife and 2 daughters, Davis had never forgotten the man who had changed his understanding of what was possible. "You should have gotten more recognition," Davis told him as they sat outside Sosi's home, watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of orange and purple. "What you created, it changed everything about battlefield optics." Sosi shrugged. Recognition wasn't important. Surviving was important. Making sure others survived was important. "They've built on your work, you know," Davis continued. "The new systems they're developing for Vietnam, they're based on your principles. More complicated, of course, but the basic approach is yours." Sosi nodded silently. He had heard similar things from his occasional military visitors, though they were careful never to reveal classified details. The crude heat detection system he had created in 1943 had indeed become the foundation for an entire field of military technology. "The Army sent me your commendation letter," Davis said, pulling a worn envelope from his jacket pocket. "They thought you might want to have it now that the worst of it's been declassified." The letter, signed by General Mark Clark himself, acknowledged Sosi's extraordinary contribution to battlefield optical systems and credited his innovation with saving hundreds of American lives through enhanced target finding capabilities in bad conditions. Formal language that couldn't capture the reality of that foggy morning near Monte Cassino when a Navajo soldier had seen the invisible and changed the course of a battle. Sosi read the letter once, then carefully folded it and placed it in a drawer. "Thank you," he said simply. "Don't you want your kids to know?" Davis asked. "About what you did?" "They know what matters," Sosi replied. That I served, that I came home, that I tried to live a good life. In 1967, as the Vietnam War got worse, Sosi received another visitor, a young Army captain from the Ordnance Department named Richard Harrington. Unlike previous military contacts, Harrington's purpose was different. Mr. Sosi, he said after the customary pleasantries, I've been authorized to inform you that the technology you developed during World War I has evolved into something quite remarkable. He placed a heavy case on Sosi's workbench and opened it to reveal a sophisticated-looking scope. This is the PVS-2 Starlight scope. It's the great-grandchild of your original design. Sosi studied the device without touching it. It's electronic, he observed. Yes, image intensification technology rather than passive heat detection. Different approach. Same goal, seeing what can't be seen. Harrington's expression grew serious. Our snipers in Vietnam are using these now. They're saving American lives every day. I'm glad, Sosi said quietly. The thing is, Harrington continued, we've hit a problem with certain air conditions in Southeast Asia. The humidity and monsoon conditions are creating challenges that our engineers can't quite solve. He hesitated. The department would like to bring you to Aberdeen as a consultant. Your intuitive understanding of optical physics might help us overcome these issues. Sosi, now 46 years old with streaks of gray in his hair, considered the offer. I have a business here, a family. It would only be for a few weeks, Harrington assured him, and the pay would be substantial. After discussing it with his wife, Sosi agreed. In early October 1967, he traveled to Aberdeen Proving Grounds in Maryland, where he worked with a team of military engineers to adapt the new generation of night vision equipment for tropical conditions. The solutions he helped develop, once again drawing on both Western science and traditional knowledge about how light behaves in different environments, would eventually be put into the AN/PVS-4 scope used extensively in later stages of the Vietnam conflict. During his time at Aberdeen, Sosi was given a tour of the facility's historical collection. There, in a special display case normally closed to the public, was his original modified scope, the crude but effective device he had put together from salvaged camera part in a combat zone in 1943. We consider this one of the most significant battlefield innovations of World War I, the curator told him proudly, unaware he was speaking to the creator. It led directly to our modern heat imaging systems. Sosi studied the device silently, the weathered metal tube, the carefully positioned crystal filters, the hand-filed copper plate, each part a testament to improvisation under the most desperate circumstances. Do you know who made it? He asked quietly. Some technical officer with the Fifth Army in Italy. The curator replied. The records are still partially classified, I believe. Sosi nodded and moved on without revealing his connection. It was typical of his humility and his understanding that the innovation itself mattered more than who had created it. After completing his consultation work, Sosi returned to New Mexico and his quiet life. The check he received from the government allowed him to expand his optical shop and establish a small scholarship fund for Navajo students interested in science and engineering, his way of building a bridge between worlds that had too often remained separate. In 1972, nearly 3 decades after that foggy morning in Italy, William Davis visited again, this time with a newspaper clipping that had caught his attention. Have you seen this? He asked, spreading the article on Sosi's kitchen table. The headline read, Army unveils new forward-looking infrared system for combat use. The article detailed a sophisticated heat imaging system being deployed to units in Vietnam, capable of detecting enemy personnel through foliage, smoke, and darkness. They're calling it revolutionary, Davis said. But you did the same thing with glass and copper in 43. Sosi smiled slightly. Not the same. Theirs is better, but based on your principles, Davis insisted. And look at this. He pointed to a quote from a General Mitchell. This technology represents one of the most significant advantages our forces have ever gained. Its origins can be traced to an improvised system developed during the Italian campaign of World War I. Sosi read the quote twice, then folded the newspaper carefully. The important thing is that it helps bring our boys home. Doesn't it bother you? Davis pressed. That you never got the credit? Sosi was silent for a long moment, gathering his thoughts. My grandfather once told me a story, he finally said. A hunter tracked a deer for 3 days. When he finally caught it, he shared the meat with his entire village. Later, someone asked him if he was proud of his hunt. He said, the village ate well. That is enough. Sosi looked at his old friend. The village ate well, William. That is enough. The years passed. Sosi's children grew up and had children of their own. His optical shop became a successful business, eventually run by his youngest son, Eleanor, his wife of 34 years. passed away in 1981 after a battle with cancer. Sosi himself remained active well into his 70s, splitting his time between traditional practices on the reservation and his continuing work with specialty optics. In 1992, as Sosi approached his 71st birthday, the unexpected happened. A letter arrived from the Department of the Army requesting his presence at a special ceremony at the Pentagon. After decades of classified status, the full story of his World War II innovation had finally been cleared for public acknowledgement. "It's about time," his oldest son said when Sosi showed him the letter. "You should have been recognized years ago." Sosi was unsure about the recognition, but agreed to attend, accompanied by his 3 children and 2 grandchildren. On June 15, 1992, in a ceremony attended by military officials, defense contractors, and a small group of aging veterans from the Italian campaign, Benjamin Sosi was awarded the Distinguished Service Medal for his transformative contribution to battlefield optical systems. The citation read by the Secretary of the Army detailed for the first time in an unclassified setting how Sosi's improvised heat detection scope had not only saved his regiment in December 1943, but had established the foundational principles for 5 generations of military night vision and heat imaging systems. Mr. Sosi's innovation, the citation concluded, combining traditional knowledge with scientific principles, represents one of the most significant individual technological contributions in modern military history. When called upon to speak, Sosi's remarks were characteristically brief. "I saw a problem," he said simply. "I found a solution. Many good men came home because of it. That's all that matters." Following the ceremony, a special exhibit was unveiled at the National Museum of American History, a display featuring Sosi's original modified scope alongside the latest heat imaging systems used in Operation Desert Storm. A sign detailed the remarkable connection linking these technologies across 5 decades and acknowledged for the first time publicly the Navajo Scout Sniper, whose unauthorized modification had changed the face of modern warfare. Among those who attended the exhibit opening was Sergeant James Morgan, a Marine Corps sniper who had served in Kuwait during Desert Storm. Using a heat imaging system that could trace its technological ancestry directly to Sosi's innovation, Morgan had been able to eliminate 3 Iraqi artillery observers during a sandstorm, saving his company from destruction, just as Sosi had done for his regiment half a century earlier. "I've waited 20 years to thank you, sir," Morgan told Sosi as they stood before the exhibit. "When they told us the history of our equipment during training, your name was the one they emphasized. Your scope saved my life and the lives of my men." Sosi, now bent with age but still possessing the keen eyes that had once looked through fog to find hidden enemies, shook the younger man's hand. "I'm glad you came home," he said simply. In the years that followed, as his health slowly declined, Sosi received letters from veterans around the country, men whose lives had been saved by the technology he had pioneered. Some wrote of Vietnam, others of Desert Storm, still others of more recent conflicts. Each letter told a similar story: impossible conditions, unseen enemies, and the life-saving advantage of being able to see what others could not. Sosi kept these letters in a cedar box beside his bed, reading them often in his final years. They meant more to him than the medal or the late recognition. They were proof of what he had told Davis decades earlier. The village had eaten well. Benjamin Sosi passed away peacefully on November 3, 2001, at the age of 80. He was buried with military honors at the Santa Fe National Cemetery, his casket draped with both the American flag and a traditional Navajo blanket. Among the mourners were Army officials, veterans from multiple conflicts, and 3 generations of his family. In his eulogy, William Davis, now in his 80s himself, captured the essence of his old friend's legacy. Ben never saw himself as extraordinary. When he looked through that scope in the fog of Monte Cassino, he wasn't thinking about changing history or inventing new technology. He was thinking about the men who would die if he couldn't see the enemy. Everything he did, from that first crude modification to his consulting work decades later, was about saving lives. He never sought recognition or reward. He simply saw what needed to be done and did it. After the funeral, Sosi's oldest son delivered a package to the Smithsonian Institution, his father's final wish. Inside was a small canvas pouch containing several unused crystal filters, pieces of copper, and hand-drawn diagrams. These were the remaining materials from the original modification, preserved for nearly 60 years. Accompanying them was a note in Sosi's handwriting. "From the earth comes the ability to see clearly. Knowledge belongs to those who will use it wisely." Today, advanced heat imaging systems are standard equipment for military and law enforcement agencies worldwide. The technology has evolved far beyond what Benjamin Sosi created in that foggy battlefield in Italy. Modern systems can detect human presence through walls, identify targets at ranges exceeding a mile in complete darkness, and tell the difference between armed and unarmed personnel through smoke or foliage. Yet military historians and optical engineers still point to that first improvised scope as the conceptual breakthrough that launched an entirely new approach to battlefield awareness. What makes SOSI's innovation particularly remarkable was not just its effectiveness, but the conditions under which it was developed. A combat zone with limited resources, created by a soldier drawing on dual knowledge traditions that normal military thinking had never thought to combine. At the U.S. Army Sniper School in Fort Benning, Georgia, instructors still tell the story of the Navajo scout sniper who could see through fog. The lesson they emphasize isn't about the technology itself, but about the mindset that created it, the willingness to challenge assumptions, to combine different knowledge traditions, and to take calculated risks when lives are at stake. The original scope that armory technicians took apart in December 1943, leaving them literally speechless when they discovered its clever internal modifications, remains one of the most studied artifacts in military optical history. Engineering students at West Point and MIT still examine its principles as a case study in elegant problem solving under extreme limits. What they find inside the weathered metal tube is more than just a clever arrangement of salvaged parts. They find a philosophy expressed through engineering, a belief that understanding the natural world deeply enough allows us to see beyond normal limitations. They find the legacy of a man who, when faced with an impossible situation, refused to accept that some things simply couldn't be seen. Perhaps the most important aspect of Benjamin Sossy's story is how it shows the intersection of seemingly contradictory traditions. The government boarding schools had tried to strip away his Navajo identity. Yet it was precisely the combination of traditional knowledge and Western science that made his innovation possible. The military system that initially discriminated against him ultimately embraced his genius, though only after he had proven its value through unauthorized action. In this tension lies a larger truth about innovation itself, that the most transformative ideas often come from those who stand between worlds, able to see connections that others miss. Sossy's modified scope was revolutionary precisely because he approached the problem from outside normal military thinking, combining knowledge traditions that institutional structures had artificially separated. Today, as new generations of heat imaging and night vision systems continue to evolve, the principle first shown by that crude battlefield modification remains at their core. The ability to see beyond human limitations by understanding and using the basic properties of light and heat. What Army armory technicians found in that Navajo Scout sniper scope tube in 1943 was more than just an unexpected arrangement of salvaged parts. They found a new way of seeing, a paradigm shift that would transform battlefield awareness for generations to come. But the greatest legacy of Benjamin Sosi isn't the technology he created. It's the lives he saved. Thousands of soldiers returned home to their families because they could see threats others couldn't, because they had advantages their enemies lacked, because one man in a fog-covered valley in Italy refused to accept blindness as unavoidable. In his final interview, given to a military historian just months before his death, Sosi was asked what he considered his most important contribution. His answer was typical in its simplicity. I help people see what needed to be seen. The question we might ask ourselves today is both practical and philosophical. What do we need to see more clearly? What fog blocks our vision? And what unexpected combinations of knowledge might help us look through it? Perhaps the next Benjamin Sosi is already among us, standing at the intersection of different traditions, seeing connections others miss, preparing to change how we see the world. The lesson of the modified scope is that innovation often comes from where we least expect it, from those whose diverse perspectives allow them to see what others cannot. Would you have had the courage to modify military equipment in a combat zone, knowing the penalties for unauthorized changes? Would you have trusted your own understanding enough to challenge established rules when lives hung in the balance? Would you have seen beyond the fog? Comment below and share this story so others remember what courage, both physical and intellectual, really means. For in Benjamin Sossy's legacy, we find not just the history of battlefield optics, but a template for how breakthrough innovation often occurs. At the margins, through combination, driven by urgent necessity, and performed by those willing to risk everything to see what others cannot. What might we see today if we had the courage to look through a different lens?